Okay, so anyway, welcome to Independence, everybody. I'm Claire Goldwater. I think I have met you all. I've seen you in previous webinars and previous other things, so I'm delighted that you're here. I know that most of you have already been in webinars on some of the value sparks. Is that correct? Is there anyone who hasn't done a value spark yet at all? Okay, so you all know what they are, so I'm not going to explain what our sparks are and where they come from and how they work. We are just going to dive straight into independence. We're going to have an exploration of independence, which will demonstrate about the spark, and we'll talk as we go about ways that you could use this, things that it makes you think of, and generally how it could be used. Okay, so good. We are going to do a little introduction using a piece of the webinar, a piece of the spark. Hold on, I just need to make sure I'm on the right page.
There. Can I ask,
yeah.
Can I just ask one question or favor? As you go through it, can you sort of explain when I know it's the content development model, just sort of this is second just map that out as we go?
Sure.
Thank
you. So Robin is talking about our model for developing content, which we call the content development model, but which if you've been in our SEC programs will be more familiar with you, and if you haven't, then will be less. What we're looking for is we're looking for the value, we're looking for the conflict inherent in the value, we're looking for the journey that the people are going on, and we're looking for a resolution of the journey at the end. So those are the sort of four main parts of the cycle. And so feel free to point them out or write them in the chat or ask questions about them as we go, and I will definitely try to point those out. But if you think I'm missing it, Robin, just, wave or something. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so here we go. We're just going to do very brief intros using a piece from the Spark. This is one of the activities, which we're just going to use it right now as an introduction. And if you look at these images, can everybody see the images? You should be able to see different images of skills that help us, that bring us to independence individually. These are all skills: changing a tire, being able to babysit, how to plant a garden, swimming, segue to Esther, right? One of the core things about being independent is to be able to do all of these different things. These are different skills that some of us have. I'm sure some people may have more. If you were in the Scouts, maybe you have more of these skills. But what I want you to just do quickly is to pick one of these skills that provides you with some kind of independence. Just choose one of them that you think you have, that somebody gave you or helped you achieve at some point. And I'm going to ask you to say what it is and to say one sentence about becoming independent with that skill. Okay, so pick a skill, and then I'll call on you and tell us which one is meaningful for you, and one sentence about becoming independent. And then just tell us where you are and say your name. Okay, so I'm just going to call on people in the order that you appear on my screen. So, Julie. You're
muted. Sorry, my phone rang, so I had to grab it. Pick a skill that I think I'm independent at. Was that the direction? Okay.
Yes, pick a skill and tell us one sentence how you gained that independence.
I can ride a bike, and I gained that independence by someone giving me the freedom to fail a couple times and fall off, and eventually I figured it out.
Okay, great. Esther.
So I'll take the navigating a foreign passport. Is that what it says? Yeah, foreign passport. I have two passports because I'm a dual citizen of Israel and the United States, and it's crazy that I can travel around the world and choose whichever passport I want to use. It's just a crazy thing, especially now when we're not traveling and the passport's sitting in the drawer. Passports are sitting in the drawer, but there's something about having an American passport, an Israeli passport that I can, not in Corona times, I can, go anywhere.
Brilliant. Robin.
You're muted, Robin.
I was also going to go with riding a bike. And I remember that after I learned how to ride a bike, I was able to bike around Martha's Vineyard by myself as a second grader. And that was so exciting.
Brilliant. Rachel, can you see these?
Yes, I can see them. I am currently in Chicago in a small house with other roommates who are also on call. So I am excited to join the call. It's just not super conducive to video calling right now, but I'm excited to be with you guys. I would choose the babysitting. So I've always loved working with kids and spending time with kids. And so when I was able to do this on my own and was trusted with by these parents, that was a big deal for me. So I remember that was a big moment for me in my teenagehood when I felt very independent.
Yeah. Sarah Beth?
I'm going to join Esther in some foreign travels. But for me, I did a lot of traveling in the States and in Europe. And so language wasn't a barrier or like a problem for me. And then Israel also, even though Hebrew looks totally different from the characters of like English and Romance languages, like I felt really comfortable before I spoke Hebrew being in Israel. But I went to Hong Kong and Japan a couple of years ago. And I can't figure out what this I don't know the symbols. I don't know the letters. And so being able to navigate there, especially in Japan, Hong Kong's a little easier, was really a test of being there for myself and figuring out for myself like how to survive. And it was awesome. And I survived. Here I am. Everything is fine.
Good. Hi, Noah. Welcome. We are just talking about being independent, and these are all skills that you gain as you become independent, or some of them. So the prompt is, which of these skills do you have, and tell us one thing about how you gained it. But we'll go to Eliza first and give you a minute to think about it. Eliza.
So I will choose speak a second language. I feel
Louder.
Still increasing my independence about speaking English, and the more I can speak English better, I feel more independent in where I live.
Great. Noah, what about you?
Just to reflect, you said we're supposed to say one that we feel pretty solid in and one that we're still working on?
No, just one that you have, one that you did gain independence, and just one thing about how you gained it.
Mm-hmm. I would say starting a bonfire. And I think I learned that definitely it started, years ago in camp and stuff. I think the first time I ever learned how to build a fire was when I was 7 years old. And it was just a very tangible skill that once I learned this, how the fire needs to breathe a little bit, and like all the different components of what makes it a successful, starting point. It became like, I understood how a process works, and that's something that stayed with me to this day.
Brilliant. Haley?
Sure. Okay, so mine is going to veer slightly away from one of them, but it's follow directions on a paper map. So I'm going to change it to learning cardinal directions, because it's something that I pride myself on, of knowing how to navigate with cardinal directions, specifically in Chicago, is where I learned to do it. And I learned it from my mom, and I could call her up at pretty much any intersection in Chicago and say, hey mom, I'm here and here. Can you direct me to get to there and there? And she would say, okay, walk 4 blocks east, walk 6 blocks north. And I would say, okay, I'm doing it. And I would get there and with no problem. In Israel, it's a little bit harder for me, but I love being able to do that. And I was that annoying local in Chicago specifically, where I'd be like, oh, it's east. And they'd be like, I don't I have no idea what you're talking about. So I love doing that.
Great. Did everybody go? Julie, did you say?
Yep, I started.
Okay, so I think everybody said, right? So I'll just say mine, which was hike an unfamiliar trail. When I learned how to follow like Israeli tour map, I was a tour guide for years. And when I learned how to go on a trail that I'd never been before by myself or leading other people, that was quite terrifying and really amazing. Okay, so we start with personal independence, and that's one of the components of the independence spark of this week. So as we go through it, which we're going to do now, we're going to kind of go between ideas about becoming independent on a personal level and independent on a national level, obviously with 4th of July coming up. And I think today is Canada Day, in fact. I don't even know, no Canadians in the room, but nobody in Canada in the room. Yeah, so
I'm
there's a lot
Canadian,
of independence.
but I love Canada.
Don't we all at this point? Good, so we're gonna do that. So here we go. I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna go onto the beginnings of the spark, and we're gonna run through it. And I'm gonna ask some of you to just read little bits of it as you know how it works. Everyone can see that, so we know how it works. We're going to start, and we'll, as we get to the activities, we'll stop and talk about them and do them. All right, so if I can just call on, let's say, Sarah Beth, just to read the first parts that we're going to get to, okay? I'm going to show you when.
It's good to call on me before my child starts crying. Okay. On the evening of the 4th of July in the United States, you may spot colorful bolts of fireworks splitting the sky. Perhaps your fork is wedged in a slice of apple pie or watermelon juice is dripping from your fingers as orchestras sound the national anthem. The fireworks above you signify joy, abundance, and unbridled freedom, a burst of light in the darkness commemorated year after year. Do you know what's happening in the news here right now with fireworks, though?
Keep going.
Where are you, Sarah Beth?
Brooklyn?
Yeah, we're getting them everywhere. We're in Los Angeles, and I mean, we've been hearing them for a month.
It's bananas. Okay, I'll keep reading.
Keep going.
Independence cannot exist in a vacuum. Its existence depends on a starting point, a flame up to the fireworks fuse, and then a set of conditions from which the subject gains freedom. In commemorating independence, we must ask both, what are we seeking independence from, as well as what are we seeking freedom to do?
Great. Just one more.
In this value spark, we will consider multiple expressions of personal and national independence and ask what independence could mean to self, family, nation, and the world.
So if I just stop there for a minute and think about those 4 levels of self, family, nation, and the world, as far as independence goes, what are the first associations that you have? Where does your first thoughts go? To self, family, nation, or world? How do you think about this? Anyone want to jump in?
I've been thinking about nation a lot.
And?
I mean, it's easy to worry about all 4 of those levels. I think being either in or adjacent to political conversations has been intense, and within the context of what's happening worldwide, pandemic specifically, thinking about how my nation shows up rather poorly, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Anyone with similar or different associations right now? Robin?
Oh, I was going to say family, and thinking about life cycle events often mark levels of independence or dependence, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking family because I have a 22-year-old that actually was in Jerusalem when this all started and had a great job and was very happy, and then had to come home and is now dependent and has kind of lost his independence because he can't get a job, and he's stuck back in his home with his family, which he hasn't been for since he graduated high school.
Wow. Right. I guess it's not a clear trajectory, right? From dependence to independence isn't such a clear one-way street, right? We can go in different directions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's carry on. We're going to start with the first chapter. Who do you depend upon? And how did you become independent from those people? So let's start. Can I ask somebody else to read this part, please? Who? Yes, Esther.
Who do you depend upon? The Talmud teaches that a parent has multiple obligations to their child in order to bring them to independence. To teach the child Torah and find them a partner, teach them a craft or a trade, and make sure they can swim. Ultimately, we cannot be independent by ourselves. We need the help and support of others to demonstrate what independence looks like. Cheer us on and let us be. Thus, our independence is the product of our relationships with teachers, camp counselors, parents, driving instructors, employees, and many others. What aspects of your independence can you attribute to lessons you learned from people upon which you once depended?
I'll just take 1 second to say in brackets, if this is our first chapter, right? Like just zoom out for a minute from the experience. I'm going to Robin's question about content development. If this is our first chapter and we're talking about dependence and independence from people who've helped us, where is the conflict here? What would be potentially the conflict that we would be looking to explore? Anybody want to suggest, like, where might that conflict lie if this is the general way that we're talking about dependence and independence? Anyone want to suggest where it might lie?
I guess, do we always depend on somebody? Is there no split in there? Are you always, I mean, we always say, oh, well, I'm just like my mother, or do our kids always come back to us, or do we always go to our parents, even at whatever age we are, or whatever age they are? Is there a conflict there? We're always depending on something. We're not 100% independent ever.
Right. So that raises the question of a kind of freedom versus dependence in a certain kind of way. Like, does it like like I said, actually you said before, like, is it a linear thing? Does it go backwards and forwards? Is there kind of, can you be dependent and independent at the same time? Right? Can I be free of my parents and still dependent on them in some kind of way? There are going to be some issues like that, which we're going to see right now.
Yeah, I didn't see the word freedom. I didn't look at it as dependence and freedom as the same, or independence and freedom as kind of clashing. It was dependence and independence more than freedom.
Right. It could be. You could use those words for sure. I was just thinking about what you said. It made me think about being, because I don't know if you said this word, but it made me think about being free of, right? When you're independent, you're free of the need to rely on someone. There's a certain freedom that goes with that. It's a sort of related concept. Okay, so let's look at the first activity that the Value Spark takes us now to, which is about fostering independence and the way that parents and children, or especially parents, have obligations to help their children become independent in Jewish tradition. I'll just say, as in brackets, there's a note about this here. Of course, the Talmud, which we're going to look at now, talks about fathers and sons. We can have a whole long conversation about what's the place of mothers and daughters, and the Talmud actually does talk about that. But we're going to treat this as, for the moment, as parents and children without the gender piece, because I think for us, in terms of independence here, I think we will learn just as much if we leave it gender free. So let's look at the Talmud, which in Tractate Kedushin, which is the place which talks about the relationships between parents and children, and especially the obligations that children have to honor their parents. So it also talks a little bit about what parents have to do for their children. So we're just going to read this quickly, and it's going to show us a bunch of different things that the Talmud requires a parent to do for their child. Robin, can you just read this part here in the box, the Gemara comments, right? It's talking about what does a parent have to do?
The Gemara comments, according to this interpretation, we learn in this Mishnah that which the sages taught in a Baraita. A father is obligated with regard to his son to circumcise him, to redeem him if he is a firstborn son who must be redeemed by payment to a priest, and to teach him Torah, and to marry him to a woman, and to teach him a trade. And some say a father is also obligated to teach his son to swim. Rabbi Yehuda says any father who does not teach his son a trade teaches him banditry. The Gemara expresses surprise at this statement. Can it enter your mind that he actually teaches him banditry? Rather, the Baraita means that it is though he teaches him banditry. Since the son has no profession with which to support himself, he is likely to turn to theft for a livelihood. This Baraita accords with Rav Yehuda's interpretation of the Mishnah.
Thank you. Okay, so what's going on? Let's just make sure we all understand what's going on. Somebody want to paraphrase? What's actually the Talmud doing here?
Laying out the obligations a father has for his child.
Okay.
Son.
So we have a list. We basically have a list. Some of them are clearly son related because the circumcision or the redemption of the son can't relate to a girl, but it's in the list. So there's a list of things that we have to do starting from the time that you're born through your life. These are the things that a person has to do, a father has to do for their son.
Well, it's a parent preparing their child to be independent.
Correct, right, exactly. So there's an interesting collection of things on this list to be independent. Anything surprising to you? What would be the thing? What are the things that are obvious that of course you have to teach your child or do for your child? What were the things that would be obvious to you?
Not to be a thief. A trade.
To teach your son a child a trade. Okay.
Torah.
Is that obvious to everyone? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it depends on your definition of Torah.
Torah. Okay, teach them Torah. Yes. Yes.
I don't think it's a trade. I think it's skills to be able to have a trade. It doesn't have to be a specific trade, but it could be the skills to have that trade.
Right. You don't have to, it doesn't say you have to be taught how to be a carpenter or how to be a farmer, but rather you have to have the ability to earn a living.
Right.
You have to have the ability to earn a living. We're not expecting you to have your child dependent on you financially for the rest of their lives, but it's incumbent upon the parent to make sure that the child will be able to get to a place of financial independence, right? Today we would say maybe the equivalent in some ways would be you have to send your child to college so that they can then get a good enough job that then they can be independent from you and look after you when you're old, potentially. Okay. So
I think I thought, looking at it, zooming out from it, it seems like it's also, in general, pointing out that a parent is obligated to give their child direction, and somewhat of a pathway of a trajectory that guides them to be able to have the empowerment to make decisions for themselves that lead to finding their reason for being, etc. Because all these things seemingly are steps towards that. It's just a matter of giving enough room.
Right. Great. Yes. Thank you. Other thoughts about any of these individual obligations or the whole picture?
I want to say something about swimming. So the
Please.
first time I encountered this text, I'm from Florida, and I'm like, yeah, you have to learn how to swim because there's pools everywhere. But stepping back now and thinking about it, it's teaching your child how to keep themselves safe, like more broadly. It's not like you need to know how to swim. It's you need to know how to keep your head above water, whatever the situation is.
Right. Right. And we could read it multiple ways. What's so beautiful about it actually is that for people who like live near water and like see that as like a really basic skill in life, I think it's an obvious thing. Of course, you should know how to do that. But if you don't, and you know, it's an interesting question about the rabbis of the Talmud here, whether they lived actually in places where there was a lot of water and whether it was like really an obvious skill that you would need. But it can certainly be read also as like as a signifier for any kind of survival skill, right? That is physical, right? Because you've got your mental skills about teaching Torah, you've got your making money, making a living kind of skill, you have having a partner, right? We need to make sure that you're not going to be alone and you'll have a family. And you also have the swimming, which, as you say, Sarah Beth, could signify for sure, like the ability to be safe, to not, you know, any kind of survival skill that involves physical skills of some kind. It might even be that that would include today, you know, something like driving a car, right? Potentially. It might be that that's almost the equivalent from that.
We're building a bonfire.
You're about to hear an amazing.
What? Just happened.
Who said that? Esther, go on.
No, I just have a question, and maybe this is me on a very personal level, but does it, because I'm single, does that mean my parents failed? And that's very painful to say and to think about. Like if these things don't happen, you know, is it, I mean, it does nothing to do with my parents that I'm not married. Nothing at all.
Right. So anybody want to respond? There are lots of ways to think about that, I think. Anybody else first? I mean, I don't know about you, but first of all, my parents didn't teach me all these things either, right? And leaving even aside the fact that they didn't marry me off at a young age, my parents didn't really teach me Torah. So I think you could ask the same question. So the Talmud, immediately after this little section, the Talmud goes straight afterwards into a whole discussion about what happens if your parents don't do this. And in every single case, it says that the person is obligated to do it for themselves or to find some kind of substitute. So it's interesting. It doesn't say, well, you know, it doesn't assume that you will always then be dependent, but just that then each individual has to actually take the responsibility for themselves. Ideally, we would be given the guidance and the help and the direction to take us to the independence. But if we cannot be made, if we didn't get those things for one reason or another, you know, maybe we didn't have parents who were alive, like nothing to do with failure. Maybe they just weren't alive. Maybe they were incapable. Maybe they didn't have enough money. Maybe lots and lots of reasons. But we still have the obligation to put ourselves in a place where we can be dependent. So that's one piece. The other piece is, you know, today, obviously, you know, when you had to marry off your child when they were like, you know, get them ready to marry when they were like 14 or 15, it's very different, obviously, the expectations of what parents would have to do than what we have today. Most of us don't follow our parents' trades either, right? We do something altogether different.
And I also want to say, Esther, that you didn't know how to swim until recently, right? And you're obviously a successful, amazing human. So I just want to put that out there.
Well, I would also put out there that I think that your parents didn't fail because I think your parents helped you be independent in lots of other ways, but they just may not be written here in the Talmud. And that is probably true for all of us.
All of us, yeah.
Right, in different ways.
This swimming, I also wonder if another way to read it is like taking care of your body, physical fitness. I don't know, like when I swim, it's like a mindful activity also. And then I don't know that I don't need an answer to this, but I'm curious how, and this may be a generalization, how the Haredim understand this text, because my understanding is in some of the ultra-Orthodox communities, they don't teach their sons a trade and their sons get paid to study.
Yes. Yes.
I was just questioning, like, in terms of swimming, I mean, I think it's just relevant to the times more than anything. I've definitely worked hard to teach my kids to swim and even taking swim lessons, et cetera, and stuff. But I think it's much bigger than that. I think it has to do with teaching a resilient skill level, like to be able to rise above the tides and, that are going to come your way. You know, one of the greatest gifts that a parent can teach their child through their lifetime, and in order to build independence, is really to learn how to address challenges and to stay afloat through them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that this text can take you in many different ways. The handout that we have here will help you do that in different ways. First of all, there's this little grid here, which allows you to think about each one of these 6 different things that the Talmud says, and to think about exactly what it does mean. So the swimming could be a survival skill. It could also be the bigger skill of resilience. It could be physical fitness. And we don't know exactly why, but it certainly could mean any or all of those things. And any of these other things that the Talmud says it could signify lots of different things. Why do I teach my child Torah? I teach them to give them multiple different things. And the Talmud, I think, is probably meaning many different things by using just this one example. So that's one piece of the activity that you could do more extensively. And then here, the second part, which we're not going to do now, is to take it a bit more broadly and to think about other kinds of independence in a Jewish way. Sort of what other kinds of Jewish independence are there, and how would we want people to become independent from them? I'll just say one more thing just about this, is just to think for a minute about who were the people who helped you be independent in all these multiple different ways, because it's not just our parents who help us get to independence. There are so many other people along the way who teach us, and who teach us Torah, teach us survival skills, teach us modeling for all different things. And I think our parents, are like the archetypal teachers, but they're certainly not the only ones. And so another kind of conversation could expand into who were those people who helped you, and who were those people who brought you to independence. Okay, we're going to leave this activity, even though we could spend longer on it, and we're going to carry on. Going back to Robin's question from the beginning, content development model. So we had our first activity. We thickened independence to think about the people who helped us become independent and the ways that we become independent. There's a little bit of conflict there if you want to think about the relationships even between parents and children, about the moment of breaking away. When do I hold on? When do I let them go? How do I let that happen? How did it feel to become independent? And how does it feel to help someone else become independent? It's sometimes difficult. You want it to happen. You want your child or the person who you're helping, your student, to become more independent. And then when they do, it also hurts a bit to let go sometimes. So there's a conflict there that I think we could expand more on. And we're going to continue the journey. Yeah, Elisa.
Just wanted to note one more conflict with young kids. Sometimes they have a conflict between independence and the necessity to learn, to put an effort in learning. So they want to be independent before they were focusing on something, and so there, I think for all of us, there's this conflict between the.
Yeah. Okay, great, excellent. So let's move on. This is the activity that we just looked at. Okay, now we're going to look very briefly. We're not going to stick on this one, but there's a second chapter, which is called the trade-off. So who I'm going to ask, Julie, could you read the trade-off, please? Except that you're muted. There you go.
Trade-off. Our relationship with independence is always in dialogue with what came before us and what shaped our understanding of freedom. Our individual journeys to independence are far from linear. Sometimes we are confronted with unimaginable situations that prematurely thrust us into adulthood. And at other times, we have the privilege to teeter between seeking dependence and craving autonomy. On the eve of leaving Egypt, God commands Moses and the Jewish people to create a calendar based on the lunar months and the solar year. In other words, God equips a newly independent people with the ability to control and sanctify their own time, whereas in slavery, their freedom was denied, therefore gaining responsibility for their choices and actions. Israelites quickly learned that independence does not come without ties and responsibilities. The ability to control how we spend our physical, emotional, and mental energy is a privilege that places us within a larger community.
Thank you. And so this is the tension. Within our daily existence, we also navigate the tension between rights and responsibilities. Being able to drive allows for a freedom to journey, to escape and to explore, but also requires a commitment to a set of rules to ensure everyone's safety. Making an important life decision can be incredibly liberating, as well as demanding entry into a new system of rights and commitment. So the trade-off is the second conflict of independence, which is it's great, but it's also really burdensome sometimes. Being independent is wonderful. Having all those skills for adulthood, which we looked at before, right? Also come, every single one of these rights and responsibilities that we have also comes with it a set of responsibilities with the rights. And this activity, which we just looked at these pictures before, but there's an activity that goes with this, which also asks you to consider and to think about and to talk about the rights and the responsibilities, the burdens. Sometimes we just don't want to be independent anymore. We want to just go home or give it all up or have someone else take care of us. And so independence is not always so, you know, wonderful and freeing. It's also potentially burdensome and painful. And that's the tension here. So there's an activity which explicitly deals with the conflict of what that is. And if any of you work with young adults or emerging adults, like, you know that that's exactly their life stage, right? And Julie's son is exactly in that position. I really want to be independent, but I'm still going home to mom, right? And that's the conflict of independence on a personal level. Okay, now we're going to get to the third chapter, which is going to drop us right into 4th of July. So this is where independence starts becoming collective and has, I think as already some of you referred to, some complications, certainly this year, if not every year. Noah, can you read this one for us?
Sure. To celebrate and to complicate. While the fireworks of July 4th seem to sparkle above us equally, the important worldwide conversations around racial justice at this time have asked us to consider whether our national independence lives up to the values for which we fought for freedom in the first place. We have come to realize that there are those still fighting for basic freedoms while we thought everyone equally enjoyed the liberties of 21st century living. The freedoms that should be communally experienced, to vote, to live without fear, to have access to equitable housing and healthcare, were actually afforded to some and denied to others. Yet our national independence remains a source of strength and joy. And there are multiple ways to engage, commemorate, celebrate, and perhaps question all the nuances. We can hold space for pride in how far we've come, as well as critical reflection for where we still need to go.
Thank you. Wait, I'm trying to move forward and my screen is frozen. Oh, there you go. Okay. So this is going to take us to the last exercise, which we call Meet Me Halfway. If you've been in a SEC program, you've done a Meet Me Halfway exercise, which is exactly the kind of expression of a conflict. And so here, the conflict that we're going to look at, whoops, not that one, sorry, is going to take us to a conversation, which we're just going to dive into a tiny, tiny bit now. Is going to take us to a conversation about 4th of July and how we understand it this year, and some of the multiple perspectives about what does it mean to celebrate 4th of July. So I'm just going to go straight to this part of the exercise. And this is an exercise where you can see the range of possibilities, right? This is actually the conflict played out. The conflict between tradition on one hand and change or reform on the other hand. And we're going to use the example of how do you feel about celebrating national independence this year? What does national independence in the United States mean for you right now? And how are you going to feel about that celebration? So on one extreme end of the spectrum, at this end, closest to where tradition is the value, you might say that achieving independence as the free United States of America is one of the most momentous and happiest days in our American history. And I'm going to party like it's 1776. There is no limit to my celebration. It's a wonderful day, and I'm going to absolutely give it all I've got. Okay, the other side of that discussion, where the value is about change and reform, the argument is to say, I'm not celebrating July 4th. This is not my celebration at this point, because we haven't lived up to the values of that independence. I'm ashamed our society doesn't afford people basic rights and freedoms, and so my way to celebrate July 4th is to protest for equality and change. Two very different approaches, and in the middle there's a whole load of others. And what I want to invite you to do is to go to the top of your screen and annotate. You can go to the top of your screen, you can look for the annotate button, which should allow you to write on this page, and you can go to text. And I'd love you to write where do you sit on this spectrum between celebrating the tradition as it always was with enormous celebration, or celebrating the need to change and really look at national independence in a different way. Take the text and write what you think somewhere along this spectrum. You can write it in a box or near a box, but try and place yourself somewhere between these two poles.
The design team trying to optimize.
Somebody has got noise in the background. If you could put yourself on mute, that would be great.
Power Rangers.
Thank you. You can either use text, or somebody just put a lovely star in here. Also, you can put yourself, you can use a stamp. If you go to the stamp section, it'll give you options like a star or a heart or a little arrow or something, and you can put yourself as an arrow.
Oh, you don't want us to write a sentence in a
no,
box?
I did want you to write, but someone else, I still put I definitely see someone put there's some symbols as well. So you're welcome to write or to put a symbol. Either way.
I gave the wrong instructions in the chat, so that's why you're getting stamps.
Oh, did you? Did you put instructions in the chat?
Yeah.
Anyway, you can do stamps, or you can write. It doesn't matter. You see some hearts. Is that one person? Okay. Can everyone place themselves? Great. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to ask a couple of people to explain why you put yourself on the spectrum where you did. One or two people. If we had longer, we would have a more robust conversation. But if anyone would like to share why you put yourself wherever you put yourself, and therefore how you feel about celebrating 4th of July this year. Somebody tell us. There's a couple of things there. Uh-oh.
Can't read what people wrote.
Right, so now there's a couple of them over here. So someone feels in the middle. Part of me feels it's problematic to celebrate it while there's so much inequality, but I recognize what America represents for many, including those who are oppressed. So that's over here. Somebody else wrote here, it's okay to celebrate, and I need to acknowledge the freedoms that I have. I think that's what someone said. I can't separate these two pieces. Haley, can you separate them?
So the person who wrote it needs to go back into annotate and click the mouse button, and then I think that they should be able to drag
Okay.
the text box.
Well, I'll share what I wrote on one of them, but I can't seem to move it. But mine is one of them that's there. Okay. It reminds me a lot of Passover and the 10 plagues, right? So we have this huge celebration about freedom, and yet we acknowledge that Egyptians drowned at our expense. And so I guess to me, there's a little bit of, actually, I didn't even think about it, but like an independent parallel there. And in our it's like almost even like a Jewish wedding, right? We stamp or the Kiddush cup at the end. So there's an acknowledgement, but it's also important to take a slice of time to celebrate.
Right. That's a very Jewish approach, actually, then. You know, it's not a typically American approach, I think, to say, well, there's always going to be a moment of sadness within it. But by adding that, it sort of adds a very Jewish take. Yeah. Anyone else?
Robin, can you move that text down so that
I can't figure out how to? I can delete it. Here. Oh, wait.
Okay. So a person underneath is celebrating the Independence Day too. So that's there. And then there's people sort of in the middle over here. And then more to the side, the best way to celebrate is to go and vote and protest. And that's actually the real celebration. Great. Anybody want to add anything to a position along the spectrum here? Okay. What else would you do with this if you were going to bring an exercise like this? Something about the spectrum and the different opinions. Target, let's just brainstorm for a minute. What are some other ideas or ways that you would use this? Or would you not?
The idea of not celebrating the 4th of July is I guess kind of radical. Like I talked to a college student yesterday who told me that their family was celebrating Juneteenth and was doing the blackout, the economic blackout, which I think I'm living in a bubble because I had no idea what she was talking about. So for me, hearing from younger people, I think is really important.
Yeah. There are things that I've also read this year, also from people explicitly saying, I can't celebrate July 4th at all. It's not my Independence Day. To me, it seems somewhat radical. It's like, for me as an Israeli, it's kind of comparable. The same conversation happens in Israel around, can we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut and what that means? And the range of opinions on that really seems to grow every year. And one of the goals of this type of exercise is to make sure that you have as many opinions as possible kind of represented here, whether it's because the people in the room have the opinions, or if they don't, how can you bring in these other opinions? Because I think it is important, actually, when we talk about this kind of topic, to like really make sure that everybody's aware, at least, that there are really multiple approaches to this, and being able to have some empathy for the other side, or for appreciation for the fact that there's a much bigger range of opinions than we think, I think is really important. So you can always find, if you don't have people in the room who represent different opinions on this, there are plenty of places to look for different opinions, so those voices can be represented.
I think the other thing as a teacher, I think you've got to realize that I think everyone falls on the spectrum somewhere. I mean, they may not everyone may not feel 100% free, but they're more free than they may be in another place. So they have to realize that they don't have to be from one everyone can be on the spectrum in numerous places. If you look at the stars, you could be everywhere. You don't have to be just in this moment. I don't feel free to vote, or I don't feel free to whatever it is, but I feel free to be able to do this. And how many people are not free to do those things?
Right.
So I think there's everyone to have those different pieces too.
Yeah, you can basically talk about different types of independence and different levels of independence,
right,
on a collective level even. Okay. All right, so I'm going to leave this exercise, and there's more there, but we're not going to look at that right now. Just go back to the, oh, hold on, we have to clear the whiteboard, I think. There we go. So we're just going to go back to the Spark and just resolve where did we go through. We started with personal independence and the people who helped us. We talked about the burdens and responsibilities of independence. Then we have a conversation about national independence with all of the different opinions. And here we get to John Adams. Haley, can you read that, please?
Yes. Actually, I think there's a typo. Oh, no, I was going to say I think there's a typo, but I'm reading it incorrectly. Of Independence Day, John Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail, I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the greatest anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shoes, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore.
And there's just a very short little exercise, which we're not going to do right now, where you can end by looking at different customs of celebrations of independence in different countries of the world, because there are different customs in different places. And it's a nice way to end with that. So that's like a little quick thing that you can do with your students. And then we resolve, or we end, or we come to the end of our journey. Independence is something to celebrate, whether it was hard won through a revolution or attained through a slow process of growth. Every country and individual that has achieved independence should commemorate in some way. That's already a judgment, clearly, and that might be worth discussing. And yet, as you bite into your third ear of corn, sit on your stoop or watch the sky light up, we must remember that maintaining independence takes tremendous work and requires a level of honest reflection. May this year's celebration of independence not only commemorate the past, but also unite the nation around the unequivocal rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Comments, thoughts? What else could you do with this? What works for you? What doesn't work with you? We'll take a couple of minutes just for reflection. Any thoughts?
I think engaging in the spectrum activity often is super meaningful. I enjoyed this one. And now I know how to use stamps on Zoom, which I didn't before just now. Because while you were all learning how to like live online, I was on maternity leave. So thanks for showing me stamps.
So much. Bye, Noah. Okay, anyone else? Any other thoughts? And then I will wish you all.
It definitely gives us a discussion to have at our 4th of July barbecue or whatever we're doing. Whether it's Zoomed
right.
or social distancing, it'll be interesting.
Right. Yeah, as long as you don't, ruin your relationships with your family or something like that. Yeah. Well, all I know is that as an Israeli, this is the same conversation that we have around Israeli independence. And as we didn't have a Yom Ha'atzmaut barbecue this year because we were all at home, we're actually having our family one tomorrow night. So I'm going to pretend that it's Yom Ha'atzmaut and 4th of July all at the same time. Oh. And we'll be the only Americans there, but we'll try and do our best.
Great.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Good to see you all. Have a good weekend.
You too.
However you do it and whatever you do.